that, I'm really excited about today's presentation. We have kind of a three-pronged approach, three different presenters all on the same topic or varying degrees of it. So I'll go ahead and introduce them. Let's see here. So first we have James Bisbee. James is a postdoctoral fellow at NYU's Center for Social Media and Politics. Previously, James was a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton's Nyhaus Center for Globalization and Governance. James received his PhD from NYU's Department of Politics in 2019, and James now studies how economic dislocation influences politics using novel data ranging from Twitter and YouTube to the US Census and quantitative methods. Megan is also with us. Megan is a research engineer and research scientist at New York University's Center for Social Media and Politics. Megan researches disinformation, content moderation, and quantitative methods for measuring online behavior on Twitter, YouTube, as well as Reddit. And Angela is with us as well. Angela is a data science PhD student at New York University working in the Center for Social Media and Politics. Her research interests include network analysis and natural language processing. So thank you all so much. I know that was really brief. I apologize. I probably have missed many accomplishments that you all have already done, but we're so glad you're here. And with that, I will turn the floor over to you.
Hey, great, thank you. Let me just screen share really quickly, and then I'll get started. Just one moment. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to figure out the internal problems with Zoom. It's got lost. Okay.
No worries, take your time.
All right, here we go. Can everyone see my screen okay and everything? Okay, great. Then I'll go ahead and get started. So Chris, thank you for the introduction. I'm Angela Lai, and I'll be kicking us off with the first of, as you said, 3 short presentations about our work on YouTube at the Center for Social Media and Politics. So I'll be starting off with the more methodological presentation, and then Megan and Jim will be talking about some more substantive work. So first things first, why do we want to study YouTube? Well, YouTube is one of the most popular websites in the world. It's actually the second most popular after Google. And according to the Pew Research Center, it is the most widely used online platform among US adults. And something that's really notable about YouTube is that it has a recommendation algorithm which has been reported to drive 70% of the views on the platform. But the thing is that we don't really know a lot about how it operates, and it's been getting a lot of press, but I think there's definitely still room in the academic space to try to study it. And so that's what we're sort of aiming to do, right? We're pretty interested in how the political landscape of YouTube looks like and how the recommendation algorithm interacts with that. So as part of that, one of our goals is to estimate the political ideology of YouTube videos at a large scale. In order to do this, we've developed a method where we first use Reddit data to obtain video ideology estimates. And then we train a natural language processing model, so a model that takes in text data as the features. And then this model is basically predicting ideology scores. And this means that we can then predict the ideology for videos which we haven't seen before. And the key advantage of this approach that I want to highlight is we don't need human labels this way. This is something that's really important given the rapidly changing political landscape, right? From month to month, there's a lot of new salient political issues, and we want to develop an approach which can quickly adapt along with that. Now, there's a pretty significant subfield of political science work where scientists are estimating ideology of different groups, right? So for example, pretty traditionally, you can observe how legislators vote on bills, for instance, or how justices rule on cases. And then from observing these behaviors, you can try to estimate ideology using automatic, mathematical approaches. And so that's where our usage of Reddit data comes in, right? we've looked at past work, like from Pablo Barbera, where they use the following behavior of Twitter users to estimate the political ideology of those Twitter users. And sort of in the same vein, we're thinking that if we can observe how Reddit users post YouTube videos, or rather how YouTube videos appear on different subreddits, we can sort of treat that in a similar way, right? And also use that behavior to try to discern the ideology of YouTube videos. So to go in a little more detail, basically, we start off with political subreddits, which, if you're unfamiliar, a subreddit is essentially a community on Reddit, which generally centers around shared interests, or in the political case, usually a shared ideology. So for example, if you look on conservative, right, you're going to see a lot of videos that presumably align with the conservative ideology, and so on and so forth, with Sanders for President and neutral news. Next, we look at the YouTube videos that are posted on those subreddits. And so the thought is, if we look at a lot of different subreddits, and then we observe, for example, a video is getting posted in the conservative subreddit and in the Donald or in libertarian, then we might think that this video is especially of interest to people who belong to those ideological groups. Probably they agree with the ideas expressed in that video. So we ultimately end up constructing a matrix with around 60,000 YouTube videos. And these are the rows of our matrix. And then on the columns, we have the political subreddits. And this is somewhere we ultimately end up with around 800 subreddits. And we take this matrix, we run correspondence analysis, and then we end up with what we treat as ideology estimates for the YouTube videos. And so to sort of validate that we're kind of getting at some notion of ideology, in this plot here, I have the video scores grouped by channel. And this is just a small selection of really popular channels. So basically on the x-axis, we have the video ideology score. So for example, what you see here, this violin plot for the progressive voice, this just shows the distribution of video ideology scores for this channel. And everything here, these are just the names of different channels, popular channels in our data set. And I'll basically highlight that here we have, for example, Bernie Sanders. These videos are pinned quite far to the left. And then, for example, if you look at Fox News, Stefan Molyneux, PragerU, these are all quite far to the right. Whereas something that's a little more centrist, like CNN, or even a mainstream news outlet like MSNBC, these are sort of more widely spread, and they seem to center a little more around the middle. So with that sort of reassurance that this seems to be getting at something close to ideology, we then train our text model. And for this text model, we have basically the text metadata associated with each video. So this means the video title, the video tags, description, and channel title. We use these as our features because we're going to have this data for every single video that we encounter, right? So we don't have the requirement of this video needs to be posted on Reddit in order to estimate a video's ideology. We're sort of taking this text metadata that is totally separate from this stage of ideology estimation, right? Then, as a label, we use the ideology estimate from Reddit, and we take these inputs to train a natural language processing model, namely the BERT model, which is going to output continuous predictions, basically. And ultimately, as I sort of mentioned, the main benefit of this is that we can then predict the ideology of other similar videos, even if we don't have Reddit data for them, and for new videos that we encounter. So next, I'll be showing you the performance of the text model. And here on this plot, we have the Reddit score, the ground truth, on the x-axis. And you can see this ranges from around -1.5 to 1.5. On the y-axis, we have the predicted score from the text data. And this is all on a test set. And here I have basically a regression line, which is fitted to this data. which you can see is fairly close to a 45-degree angle line, which is what we would desire. And we end up getting an R squared value of around 0.8, and our MSE is around 0.16. So we feel fairly confident that the text model does a good job of recovering these ideology estimates using text data alone. Now, we have these channel validations, and I think I've shown that the text model seems to do pretty well. But I think a common question would be, okay, but what about the video level, right? So to that end, to show that our model does a fairly good job of pinning videos down ideologically, not just channels, we're asking human coders to label pairs of videos. So on the coding interface, we're presenting them with a top video and a bottom video, and then they need to indicate which video is more conservative, or depending on the wording, more liberal. And so we take all these pairs of videos and we compare the scores from our classifier or from our estimator to the results, to the judgments made by the human coders. So here I have the accuracies, and these are binned by the distance between the ideology scores of the top video and bottom video. So first off, right, overall, our video scores agree with human coders around 78% of the time. And in this plot, I'm basically showing how that changes as the distance between the top video and the bottom video increases. So you can see here that we have 5 different bins, and as the videos get further from each other, we get a higher percentage of agreement with the human coders. So this is something that's definitely still underway. We are still asking human coders to label more and more videos, but these are the preliminary results so far, and we find this pretty reassuring. Next, I have a visualization that kind of gets at the same thing, right? Where we essentially illustrate that our accuracy improves as the distance between the video scores increases. And again, on the x-axis, we have just the pure distance between the scores of the top and bottom video. And then on the y-axis, we have very simply an indicator of whether or not we agreed with the human. So if you have 0, that means that the scores did not agree with the human. And if we have a 1, that means that we did agree. And you can see that as the distance increases, the accuracy, again, just tends upward. So ultimately, we find that Reddit data can be leveraged to place YouTube videos in, if not an ideological space, at least an ideological adjacent space. And we take this method and we take the scores that we get from our estimator to help us study political YouTube videos and the recommendation algorithm. And that wraps up my presentation on this method, but I'm going to hand it over to Megan Brown next, and she's going to go into some more detail about some more substantive work studying political YouTube. So thanks very much for your attention, and I will stop screen sharing.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen now. Oh, that's not it. Can everyone see the presentation? All right, great. So thank you, Angela, for introducing the method. With that in mind, we're going to be looking at the ideology of content that YouTube is recommending to real people. So I'm going to discuss a little bit of the YouTube platform. There are some things that we know about YouTube in the qualitative sense. Some research by other researchers and journalists posits that YouTube's recommendation engine, which Angela briefly discussed, is recommending increasingly extreme content to people the longer they watch political content on the platform. What we know about YouTube quantitatively is much less clear. Results from these studies are very inconclusive. Some of them show a growing consumption of and interaction with right-wing content. Others show little evidence of ideologically extreme content promoted from the recommendations. What these studies lack, though, is ecologically valid data of the recommendations. These studies either use past web browsing history or use recommendations collected via bots with no YouTube history. And because we know that YouTube watch history and YouTube accounts are such an integral part of what gets recommended, we decided to field a survey where we asked individuals to log in to their YouTube account and follow recommendations in the way that we instructed them to. So what we did first was we recruited a convenient sample of YouTube users to install a web plugin extension. You can see what this extension looks like to users on the right. We started them on a randomly assigned seed video out of 15 political videos or 9 non-political videos. The 15 political videos spanned the ideological spectrum from Fox News to MSNBC to the Young Turks. We had them follow a given traversal rule. So we assigned them to either always follow the first video or always follow the second video or always follow the third video and so on, or we assigned them to follow a video that they most preferred. We asked them a short survey on how they use YouTube. They could upload their YouTube watch history if they wanted to for additional compensation. And then finally, we use all of this information together to look at how the YouTube recommendation engine is recommending ideological content to users. So we start with our research question, does YouTube's recommendation algorithm push users into ideological echo chambers? We're going to show you a couple different traversals that our respondents went on to illustrate this point. So on the x-axis here, we have the traversal step, which is how far into this task they were, essentially how many videos they'd clicked on from the starting video in the survey. And on the y-axis, we're going to be showing the ideological distribution of the videos that they were recommended. So for this given respondent, we assigned them this video to watch. Trump continues to push false claims of election fraud in Facebook video. Our ideology model that Angela described rated this as being a pretty liberal video. When we went to pull their recommendations, which we're showing here on the right, the top video was conservative. The next one was center left, and so on. For the entire set of 20 recommendations, we measure their ideology and we can show their distribution here. We asked this individual to always click on the second video. And on their second video, they got this second distribution and so on and so forth. What we can see from this user is that generally when we asked them to randomly, when we gave them the random assignment to always click on the second video, they received a wide range of ideological content, not particularly narrow, wasn't particularly leaning in a very conservative direction or a very liberal direction. Conversely, one of our other respondents' recommendations looked like this. We started them off on a moderate video. Their first set of recommendations was fairly diverse, and thereafter they had a very narrow set of ideology, and a particularly right-leaning ideological distribution for the videos they were recommended. So given these two examples, we're constructing our measurement of ideological echo chambers to include both the average ideology of the recommendations, so whether the recommendations are very liberal or very conservative, and the average variance of the recommendations that they receive. So how varied the ideology is of the videos that they're recommended. I'm now going to show some results from this survey. On the x-axis here, I'm going to be showing the average ideology of the first and second, of the recommendations from the first and second traversal steps compared to the average ideology of the recommendations from the 19th and 20th steps that they took. On the y-axis is going to be the average recommended ideology. We've labeled MSNBC, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and Fox News. just for the sake of understanding where on the scale these users are. And we're going to split these results by the party affiliation of the users. So for our first set of Democratic users, we can see that regardless of the starting ideology of the video, that they start on, all of these Democratic users, when they follow the recommendation engine, end up going towards the center right or staying at the center right. Again, for independent users, we see something very similar. When they start on a liberal video, they go towards the center right. When they start on a conservative video, they stay in the center right. And when they start on a moderate video, they stay the same. And for Republican users, we get this most stark finding. Liberal videos go to the center right again, as do traversal paths that start on moderate videos and those that start on conservative videos. Second, we're going to show the variance of their traversals. Again, with the initial recommendations compared to the final recommendations, and split by the party affiliation of the users that we surveyed. So for our Democratic users, regardless of the ideology of the video that they start on, the average variance of their recommendations goes down. For independent users, we see that when they start on liberal videos, their average variance goes down. On conservative videos, it goes up slightly, and on moderate videos, it stays the same. And for Republican users, we see that regardless of their starting ideology, the variance of their recommendation, the ideological variance of their recommendations goes down. So what did we learn from this survey so far? Technically, from Angela, we found that we could estimate ideology and combine that with novel data from real users that's ecologically valid at the time that we surveyed them. Substantively, we found that more time clicking on the recommendations means you're getting more conservative, at least towards the center right, and less diverse recommendations. And this trend towards more conservative and less diverse content is strongest amongst our Republican respondents, which does match some of the qualitative work that's been done in this area, that a lot of this behavior that's being found is being found by these more right-leaning communities on YouTube. Some limitations of this method. We're just looking at a snapshot in time. We conducted this survey from October through December of last year. So the YouTube recommendation engine is constantly changing. If we want to keep up with whether these trends hold, we do need to be constantly looking at how users are interacting with the algorithm. Also, at this point, we are only looking at the supply side, what YouTube was recommending to people when we randomized what video they could pick. We have not yet looked at what this looked like when users were selecting the videos they most wanted to watch. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'll be handing this over to Jim to talk about some of our other findings around election fraud.
Cool. So I will wrap us up here. Like Megan said, we conducted this survey to investigate the ideology of recommendations in the fall of 2020. And as you all know, that happened to also be the presidential election, which turned out to be a real edge of your chair affair. So the motivation for the final project that's part of this overarching research is investigating the possible degree to which YouTube's recommendation algorithm put people into informational echo chambers in which those who were most likely to believe Trump's narrative of election fraud were also going to be having that narrative reinforced while they were online. And arguably, this contributes to the January 6th riots at the Capitol. So, like Megan said, this survey that we conducted in the fall, between October 20th and December 1st, we added a battery of questions about the presidential election. So in addition to asking these respondents to traverse and to scrape what they're being recommended, We also asked them what they thought about the 2020 US presidential election. So the goal of this is to see if there's a relationship between a user's belief in an election fraud narrative and whether they were being shown things on YouTube that reinforce that worldview. So the theory is very straightforward. We know, based on Google's own research white papers, that their recommendation algorithm at a high level is designed to maximize watch time. It's designed to choose videos that it thinks users will click on. So our assumption, and this is building off of a lot of work recently in political science about ideology, is that people are homophilous. They like things that they agree with. They don't like to be challenged. And so the theory, our hypothesis that spills out of this fact plus this assumption is very straightforward. If the recommendation algorithm is good at maximizing watch time, it might result in filter bubbles that have negative consequences for a deliberative democracy. Filter bubbles in which people who believe a conspiracy about election fraud are going to hear that reinforced to the extent that they take action and commit violent criminal acts. So the explanatory variable of interest for us is this measure of how skeptical our respondents are about the 2020 election. So we asked a number of questions, like I say, between October 20th and December 1st. The first asked them to indicate how concerned they are about the following problems, right? So we asked about the possibility of fraudulent mail-in ballots being counted, valid ballots not being counted, whether they thought there was widespread voting, illegal voting by non-US citizens, or more generally, if there was interference or influence by foreign actors. These are all sort of parts of the narrative that Trump and others in the conservative media were spinning to create this sense of a stolen election, an unfair outcome. We also asked them over the course of this month, a month and a half, whether they knew, or whether we as a country knew who won the election. And so conditional on them saying, yes, we do know, we asked first, who is it? Is it Trump or is it Biden? And then we asked whether this outcome is legitimate. And then finally, we also asked after, I think it was November 10th or so, we started asking the question whether Donald Trump should contest the results in court or whether he should concede. So these battery of questions capture our quantity of interest, whether the respondents that we surveyed were more skeptical of the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election. Our outcome variable is an evaluation of what they were shown, right? So we've got this whole list of videos that they're being recommended. We could rely on Angela's method to look at the ideology of them, but for this specific topic, it's a pretty narrow topic. We want to actually get a little bit more detailed than just sort of a broad ideology. And so we use topic models of the recommended videos metadata. So these topic models, estimated via LDA, latent Dirichlet allocation, effectively look for semantic topics from the co-location of words among these different videos. And without belaboring the math here, for each topic, we can get a probability of a word conditional on that topic, denoted phi. And for every video, we get a topic loading, the probability of it being topic K conditional on a video V, denoted with theta. And so what we did after estimating these topic models is we then inserted, we searched for a set of keywords that we had decided were most likely to be about the narrative of election fraud. So things like Dominion and Smartmatic, the voting machines that Trump argued were illegitimate. Things like voter fraud, fraudulent ballots, all of these different terms we searched for among these different words. And then we created a score for each video that added up the fees, these probability of the word being associated with the topic, and then weighted them by the loadings onto the video. So for each video, we have effectively a weighted sum of the words that we think are most likely to be about election fraud. And so to give you an idea of what the highest scoring topics look like, the most likely topic, the topic that we think is most focused on this narrative of election fraud, was topic number 108. The highest scoring terms here were news, Trump, election, Donald Trump. And then there were 37 of these keywords that we had searched for, right? So things like fraud, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, recount, fake news, all of these terms were heavily loaded onto this topic. And so this gave us some confidence that we had found the topic, the set of videos that were about election fraud. When we look at the actual videos themselves, we find that the highest scoring videos associated with topic 108 are either from the White House and our press briefings around the time of the election, where Trump's press secretary was literally laying out this narrative of a stolen election, or they were from a subsidiary of Fox News called News Now. And based on these titles, we can again sort of confirm that this topic is not only about election fraud writ large, but it is taking a stance. It's reinforcing these claims that the election was illegitimate. And so armed with this outcome, we're simply going to investigate whether users who were more self-reportedly skeptical of the election were being recommended content about the election fraud. So it's a very simple regression. We're just going to predict the proportion of videos about fraud as a function of the user level self-reported skepticism. And our hypothesis, our theory is straightforward. Like if the algorithm works, these users should be being shown content, more fraud content than other users. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the specification. We're not going to be controlling for user demographics in this. It's, I think, going to be a post-treatment variable, but we can talk more about that if there's questions. And this is going to be our main Marquet result, right? So this is for topic number 108. Each of these points is a coefficient representing the relationship, the correlation between users' self-reported skepticism and the proportion of videos that they were shown about election fraud, right? So the top panel in this plot is indices, where we just added up all of the questions about fraud, all of the questions about legitimacy, and created indices out of them. We find that the combined index is statistically significant and positive, and it's really being driven by the fraud questions. And this is reinforced as we break out the individual questions below. So there's the dimension of skepticism about whether Trump should concede or contest is unrelated to what was being shown, but those who believed that the outcome was illegitimate were being shown more fraud-related content while spending time on YouTube. They were also more likely to think that foreign governments interfered, that non-US citizens voted, and that fraudulent ballots were being counted, right? So taken together, this is strong evidence consistent with our theory that the recommendation algorithm is showing people content that reinforces their worldview, and in the context of a worldview that is, I think, unarguably damaging for democratic legitimacy, this has pernicious consequences. So substantively, we can translate those coefficients into estimates of how many more videos this actually is. So we can compare the bottom 5%, the least skeptical users, to the most skeptical users, and run that through our regression model and get predictions for how many more fraud-related content, fraud-related recommendations that were shown. It's roughly 14 videos. And to put this in context, over the course of this task that Megan described, they're shown a little bit less than 400 total recommendations. So on the one hand, 14 more videos out of 400 is perhaps not that concerning. But on the other hand, when we compare the most skeptical to the least skeptical, right, this is like a 700% increase in the fraud-related content that's being shown. I will very quickly go through this. So we ran some additional tests to confirm that our results are picking up what we think. Specifically, we ran a placebo test where we compared the coefficient estimates from the regression I just showed you to one where we replaced the topic with a different topic. And specifically, we chose a topic about a very popular online video game called Among Us. And for those of you who aren't aware, this video game just happened to spike in popularity right around the time of the US presidential election, right? So this means that it's a very useful placebo test for us. If our theory holds, if our hypothesis is true, there should be no relationship between skepticism and this Among Us video game, but there should be very strong results, like I just showed you, between skepticism and fraud content. And sure enough, that's what we find. So on the left is the same set of results I just showed. On the right is topic 143, which is this Among Us topic. And here we find consistent null results across the board, right? There's no relationship between being skeptical about the US presidential election and how often you were shown videos about Among Us, but there's a very strong relationship between the same sense of skepticism and videos about fraud itself. So did YouTube show skeptical users more content, more videos about election fraud? Yes, they did. Again, it's important to caveat the findings here. First, as Megan mentioned, this is a convenience sample, right? We put an ad up on Facebook and asked YouTube users to participate in a survey. This means that our sample is younger, more liberal, and more educated than the US demographics writ large. One might, I mean, we need to look into this more, maybe do an additional follow-up survey, but this might mean that our results are a lower bound, that if we actually did get older, more conservative, less educated Americans taking our survey, they might be being shown even more election fraud content. There's also a sort of substantive question that we need to unpack, which is whether what we're showing is evidence of the recommendation algorithm picking and choosing different videos to be shown, or if instead the recommendation algorithm for different people says, you seem to like Fox News, we're going to show you a bunch of Fox News videos. And then Fox News, as the content creator, shifts what is being produced over the course of the period that we study. But that is the end of my presentation and the end of all of our presentations. So thank you for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. God, that was really great content and really, really important topic to cover as well. Does anybody have any questions? I see we have some questions coming up in the chat here. Let's see. I'm sorry, Espai, try leaving the group and coming back in if you can. I'll be sure to admit you if you're still having trouble hearing us. It might be an audio issue with your laptop. And then Recep is asking, are you working with video or image information and videos on your research other than text and other text-based data, metadata information? I am working on opinion mining, emotion assessment, and emotion profiling of YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram videos. My research is mostly working with the content of social media posts, including video, audio, and text data and their opinion scores. Also, will the recording be available? I can answer that last question. Yes, it will be available on the group's YouTube page. But yeah, feel free to go ahead and respond. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we are only using the text data so far. I think we've potentially toyed with like video using other information, but I think the conclusion for us was that it might be a little too expensive, like model-wise or computationally, and not really worth the payoff. But we think, I mean, for future things, it could definitely be really interesting to try to work with that data. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions from anyone in the audience? Small group today. I have a couple of questions, if that's all right. And I apologize, I am not a data scientist, so these are not very technical. But, and this might be impossible to quantify, but do you think that some of the reason why YouTube seems to kind of push people to right-leaning sources or radical right sources, could there be more content out there that is leaning in that direction than the other way?
Yeah, so that's certainly what some other researchers have found, just looking at descriptives on YouTube around political channels. There's a paper by Kevin Munger that shows that just the amount of right-wing content on YouTube generally just outweighs that of left-wing content. So there is certainly a supply element here, that there's just a lot of it on YouTube. So if you're going to, you know, if we look at all of this and think, oh, we're just, you know, landing on the average of content on YouTube, that certainly could be the case, just given the volume of right-wing content.
And this is also a pretty broad question too, but what would you recommend to YouTube? Is there a way they could tweak or correct their algorithm to try to make it more, I guess, diverse in the type of videos that it points people to, or less biased?
You want to answer that one, Megan?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. You know, I think sort of a good way to think about the recommendation algorithm is that there's a bunch of different dials that YouTube can tune. One of them can be how much political content you get. Another one could be what the average ideology of that content is. The other one could be the variance. I think it's certainly possible that they could recommend more varied content, or if they wanted to, recommend only left-wing content. I think that's more so a question for what do we think a good recommendation algorithm looks like? Is it something that prioritizes giving people diverse news feeds? Is it something that prioritizes giving people news feeds that matches their own ideology? I don't know that we have a great answer for that. I do think we're all sort of generally in the camp that ideally it would reduce harm, potential harm. So especially things like Jim was discussing with respect to disinformation being promoted via the algorithm. But just with regards to the ideological spectrum, they certainly could. I don't know that it's in our wheelhouse to say whether or not they should.
I might just quickly jump in. One thing that I didn't share, but for the election note in the paper, we've got sort of a concluding plot, which Megan put together, which shows YouTube was the latest of all the major social media platforms to crack down on election misinformation or disinformation content, right? Like Twitter famously just canceled Trump right away and went on a real tear, canceling a bunch of other accounts. Facebook did shortly thereafter. YouTube waited, I think until, correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, it was December 8th?
Yeah, the safe harbor deadline.
That's right. So YouTube waited until the established institutions of democracy, the safe harbor deadline being where the votes were finally certified, until that date. And what we show is that after they then cracked down on this content, there was an enormous drop off, right? So this is, oh, thank you. Perfect.
You're welcome.
Right. And so what we see here, this is the percent of tweets linking election fraud videos. There's this big drop off after the safe harbor deadline, which is when YouTube stepped in, and then another drop off after January 6th itself. And so to your question, there's basically, if we're worried about conspiracy theories or misinformation or other things that can cause genuine harm to the fabric of society, there's two things, big picture, that YouTube can do that you asked in your question, right? They either change the recommendation algorithm or they censor content, or somewhere in between, somewhere in both. And what I think we find, at least based on this plot, and also it's important to remember that like a recommendation algorithm that shows people what they want is not normatively bad always. It's bad when what people want is misinformation or disinformation, right? But in many other contexts, it is objectively good to show people content that they're not aware of, but that might be of interest to them. And so therefore, I would argue the big challenge here for YouTube, as with all of these other social media platforms, is more on the moderation and censoring very extreme content, right? So that there just isn't the supply of it there to be recommended, as opposed to going in and being like, well, if it's a political video, then maybe it should be more diverse. But if it's about, health issues, then it should be very focused, for example.
Thank you all
Good
so
pull
much.
on the plot there, Megan.
Any other questions from anyone? All right, well, I will go ahead and stop the recording now. Thank you, James. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Megan, so much.
Thank you.